Okay, you just tell me when you're live. We're live now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September meeting of the Mansfield Shire Council. I'd like to welcome all councillors here today. We have Councillor Sladden, Councillor Tian, Councillor Webb and Councillor Raby. I'd like to welcome the CEO, Scarlett Conrick, the General Manager of Infrastructure and Planning, Ms. Kirsten Alexander, and the General Manager of Community and Corporate Services, Mr. Kurt Heidecker, and also our Coordinator of Governance and Risk, Ms. Moira Moss. Welcome to you all. Let's commence the meeting. Firstly, I'll ask each councillor to confirm verbally that they can see all councillors and hear the proceedings. Councillor Raby?
I can see all councillors and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Sladden? You're on mute, Paul.
Apologies. I confirm I can see all councillors and staff and can hear the proceedings.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor Tan?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can see all councillors and council staff and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Webb?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I can hear the proceedings and see all councillors and council officers.
Thank you. Can I ask each councillor to confirm by raising their hand that they could all hear each statement of the councillors? Thank you, councillors. Apologies. Madam CEO, are there any apologies?
There are no apologies tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I will read the statement of commitment and call on each councillor to confirm their commitment. As councillors of Mansfield Shire, we're committed to ensuring our behaviour meets the standards set by the Mansfield Shire Councillor Code of Conduct and Councillor Charter. We will at all times faithfully represent and uphold the trust placed in us by the community. Councillor Raby?
I confirm my commitment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sladden?
I confirm my commitment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Tan?
I confirm my statement of commitment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Webb?
I confirm my statement of commitment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 5, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tan, will you recite Council's acknowledgement of country, please?
Yes, our meeting is being held on the lands of the Taungurung people, and we wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. We'd also like to pay our respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today.
Thank you, Councillor Tan. Item 6, disclosure of conflicts of interest. I'll ask each councillor to declare whether they have any conflicts of interest in relation to any agenda items. Councillor Raby?
I have no conflict of interest to any agenda item.
Thanks, Councillor Raby. Councillor Sladden?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to item 13.2.7, I wish to make the following statement. I am one of the 5 founding members of the Mansfield Community Shed that acted as the steering committee from 2002 until 2005. I am the current chairman of the Australian Men's Shed Association. I was responsible for the sourcing, application, receipt and acquittal of all funding for the construction of the Mansfield Community Shed. Under delegation, I was responsible for signing the lease between Mace and the then administrator of council during the period of the amalgamation. I am also a witness signatory to the original Memorandum of Understanding between Mace and the Mansfield Community Shed Steering Committee. Therefore, I will absent myself from the discussion and voting on item 13.2.7. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Councillor Tan?
I have no conflict of interest on any of the agenda items tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Webb?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No conflicts to declare in regards to any agenda items tonight.
Thank you. Item 7, the confirmation of minutes. Do we have a motion there, please? Councillor Rabi? A seconder? Councillor Sladden? Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Representations. I believe we have a number of deputations this evening. For item 13.2.5, we have Mr. Ed Adamson. For item 13.2.7, Ms. Kylie Richards from Mace, Ms. Janine Ridley from Mace, and Mr. Murray Chenery from Mace. On the same item, we have Mr. Ray Barker from the Men's Shed, Mr. Dane Bender representing the Men's Shed, and Mr. Bill Copley representing the Men's Shed. And on item 13.4.1, we have Dr. Emily Dirksen, GP, and Ms. Cassie Pentony. Item number 10, the Mayor's report. I'll take the report as being read. Are there any questions or comments on this report? All those in favour, sorry, Councillor Rabi.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to draw the attention of those watching today to part of your Mayor's report, which is, and if I can read it verbatim, Council has also recently been very pleased to support a number of applications from the private sector for electric vehicle charging stations. We very much see our role as supporting and advocating for electric vehicle charging options, as opposed to spending ratepayer money in an area which will continue to attract private sector investment. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rabi. Thank you. Do we have a motion? Councillor Tan, seconder. Councillor Rabi. Those in favour? Thank you. The motion is passed.
Mr. Mayor, could I just read out that motion and speak to it? The motion is that Council receive the Mayor's report for the period
yes, sorry. Yep. Point taken.
August 2021 to the 30th September 2021. And if I could just highlight one area of that report, which was Council commissioned Mr. Terry Bramham to come in and look over our council and its governance. And it was a very good session. And as it says there, that you've written, Mr. Mayor, that Mansfield was an example of one of the better functioning councils. In fact, I think you're being kind on yourself, because he actually said that it was the best functioning council meeting that he viewed, which was the July meeting, that he'd seen in the state, and commented on other councils and how sometimes their meetings were deteriorating in general. So I'd just like to acknowledge your role, Mr. Mayor, in that, for leading such, setting such fine example. In fact, he even went on to say that he would like to use Mansfield Council meetings as an example to other councils in the state. So I'd just like to acknowledge your role as Mayor in that.
Thank you, Councillor Turn. I think you've been overly kind. Thank you. Having said all that, it's got to move. We've got a seconder. All those in favour of the motion? Thank you. Item 11, reports from council appointed representatives. Going just down the list of various committee members, committees and committee members. The Golden Murray Climate Alliance. Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. We did meet last month, just after our previous council meeting. It was our AGM. The transition process is currently underway from transitioning from Shepparton to Murrindindi as an auspice, which just about wrapped up. So while this process is being taken, proactive work has sort of paused, but this is about to recommence as of the end of this month, which is good. During the meeting, we did have several presentations around our current strategic theme, which is environmentally sustainable design, which has been sort of spoken about in a few different forms around council. And I think it's probably something that most councillors here would be in favour of. Simon Francis, who's the ESD officer at the City of Bendigo, presented the CASB, which is the Council Alliance for Sustainable Built Environment. There's currently 29 member councils for this particular working group, and one of their key projects is what they're calling elevating Esd Targets. So they're basically submitting a group planning scheme amendment for the 29 councils. Basically, the aim behind it is to put together an evidence base for the planning scheme amendment, which encourages new developments to produce zero net emissions, manage water and waste better, and increase the greening and biodiversity of new developments, and also buildings that provide a healthier, more comfortable environment for the community and improve health outcomes. They're going through a technical feasibility analysis, cost benefit, blah, blah, blah. And then it will move to a stage 2. The whole idea behind the alliance is that it's a shared cost model, so that obviously they can share resources in terms of putting together the planning scheme amendment, share information, and obviously share costs around doing things like that. Mansfield Shire is currently not part of CASB. I would be interested to see if the officers know about it, and if they do, if they can provide any comment on CASB as a whole, or if we can get some research and potentially a report given to council around the CASB Alliance. Further to that, no, that's about it. That's all I've got in my notes. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. With respect to the next item, the next committee there is the Hume Regional Local Government Network, which met about 2 weeks ago. A few points that came out of that. Firstly, the secretariat of that committee was being handled by Mansfield Shire. That's now moved to Mitchell Shire for the next 2 years. And I'd just like to thank Lisa Frick and our CEO, Kayleen Conrick, for the work that was done on that, because there's a lot of work has to be done on the secretariat to organise a fairly large group like that. The format is changing going forward, so that the mayors and CEOs as a forum will meet once per year from now on. And the CEO, and that will be more at the larger, dealing with the larger strategic items, and the CEOs will meet quarterly. One of the other points that came out of it was that Mark Davis, who from FB Solutions, who I think we've come across before, with some work on the long-term financial plan. He's working with 3 councils in the Hume region area on a simplified software template for long-term financial plans. So I'll be interested to see how that works out and whether that's applicable to ourselves. That's all on that one. Lake Eildon Land and On Water Management Plan Committee, Councillor Sladen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There has been no meeting, having trouble getting a suitable meeting date. However, in relation to Mansfield Shire Council, work has been going on in the background, and this will be addressed in item 13.2.3 on tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. The Mansfield Shire Council Audit and Risk Committee, Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So the performance statements and financial reports and governance checklists that are slated for tonight's meeting, we reviewed these in order to put them forward to tonight's meeting. There was a lot of discussion around the risk register, and next meeting in November, there's going to be a I think we're going to spend a bit of time looking at it in detail. There's also an action slated to occur around cybersecurity risk, which I think is quite timely considering there's been a bit of news in the media recently about other local governments seceding to some attacks. So I think it's timely. And we had a draft of the external audit report as well. It was circulated for review. That's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. The Shire Business and Community Recovery Advisory Committee, I don't think it's met. Councillor Sladen?
No, Councillor Hall, Mr. Mayor. As reported at the last meeting, this committee has now been dissolved. The only action item that is awaiting implementation is the feedback and the review of how that committee operated, and I don't know where that's at. Maybe Mr. Heidecker could enlighten us, but there's no further meetings of this group.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
So, Mr. Mayor, yes, there's a draft memo that is being I've just reviewed that goes through the feedback from the committee and the contribution they've made. So that should be released in the next couple of days.
Thanks, Mr. Heidecker. Thank you, Councillor Sladen. There was no meeting of the MAV. The North East Local Government Waste Forum, Councillor Ravi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. The last meeting was last month, and I reported on that at our previous council meeting. The next meeting will be in 3 months' time.
Thanks, Councillor Ravi. And there was no Rural Councils Victoria meeting. Councillors, do we have a motion regarding point 11? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Motion being that council note the verbal reports provided by councillors in relation to their representation on external committees.
Second, please. Councillor Sladen. Thank you. Those in favour? The motion is passed. Thank you. Public question time. We've had a number of questions. We've had 5 questions from Mr. Warren Shepherd and 1 question from Ms. Nola Evans. Both community members have asked about the Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve. Mr. Shepherd asked 5 questions. Our governance rules allows 2 questions per person. Some of them are similar, and Ms. Evans's question also covers the Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve as well. So I'll pick out the 3 which cover the more varied area, if you like, of varied areas that they're looking to get answers to. Mr. Shepherd asked, if the Mansfield Shire are to manage the Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve, will the facility receive a larger proportion of Shire funds than are currently awarded? Response from Council is that Council has given due consideration to the funds required to manage the facility and anticipate that additional funds will need to be allocated to this facility to support the ongoing management of the site. Another question asked by Mr. Shepherd was, if the Mansfield Shire are to be the managers of the Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve, what is to happen to the funds held by Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve Committee, Inc? Council's response is that Council will work with the existing committee and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning to ensure a smooth transition of the management of the site to Council, and the funds associated with the reserve are part of this. Ms. Nola Evans asked also to do with the Bonnie Doon Rec Reserve, as I mentioned, is there any process in place to ask and inform the broader community of the planned transfer of management from local committee to Mansfield Shire? And the response from Council is that Council is requesting transfer of the management of the site from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and intends to seek assistance from the Bonnie Doon community in the ongoing management of the Rec Reserve, and would welcome input from all areas of the community. So thank you to both of you for those questions. And I'm sorry, Mr. Shepherd, that we're only allowed to answer 2 of the 5 that you asked, but hopefully that covers the bases that you're after. Item 13.1 is the Chief Executive Officer's report. Are there any questions or comments to the CEO, councillors? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few questions. To just the Capital Works report, the View Street roundabout's listed as completed in February, but I know there's a fair bit of work going on, may not be exactly on the roundabout, but in that area. Is that related to the roundabout, or is that a completely different piece of work? I've just had a few questions asked of me by the community.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll pass over to the General Manager of Infrastructure and Planning to respond to that question. Thank you.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the works to do the bus bay outside the Rudolf Steiner School, I guess you could say that's sort of loosely associated with the roundabout, but we were reflecting that the roundabout itself was finished in February, and these are ongoing works just to finish off that total project there.
Okay, great. As well as the dual court stadium, I know we had a PC date at mid-September. Did that end up happening? Do you know?
Yes, it did. There was an inspection. I think it was the 15th of September, but I might have that date wrong.
No, all good.
Yeah.
And do you know how this 2-week construction industry shutdown will, obviously it's going to push everything back by a couple of weeks at least?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully, it is only actually affecting the local government areas that are locked down, but it potentially will have an impact in terms of the requirement to vaccinate construction workers, and just depending on the level of vaccination of the works that we have ongoing. The main one would be the resheeting program that we have ongoing at the moment. So given it's relatively small numbers, we'll obviously be reaching out to our contractors just to assess any potential impacts.
Yeah,
and
great.
we'll keep you posted.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the CEO. Just a couple of questions regarding in her report on page 20 about the Startup Shake Up Digital Literacy Program. There was, I take it, $30,000 from Bushfire Recovery Fund, and that project manager has been appointed. I was just wondering who that project manager is and at what stage that project's at, and just a brief outline of what it does. Also on that same page, the $50,000 of funding to T&E from our Shire, I take it, in terms of business development to assist 19 businesses, just the process behind that and where that's at.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll refer to our General Manager of Community and Corporate Services to answer that question. Thank you.
Very good, Mr. Mayor. The digital literacy program is being delivered by Startup Shake Up, and the project manager is a Startup Shake Up contractor. The reason that arrangement is in place is not only are Startup Shake Up a delivery partner of ours, but they've also delivered this same program at a regional level. So there was a procurement exemption so that they could be used to deliver this project in our Shire region as well. Does that answer the question, Councillor?
Yeah, who is the contractor? Sorry.
The person who individual. I'm not sure who that person is, but certainly a contractor that works for Startup Shake Up.
Oh, okay. It would be good to perhaps find out who that was down the track, and also, the T&E. The question around T&E and that 50,000 of funding, and I take that that's from bushfire funding too, coming out of Mansfield Council. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is indeed correct. It's $50,000 of bushfire funding. The program initially was available to 25 businesses. We went through an EOI process and approached several of our local businesses that are listed on the next page. Unfortunately, only 19 of those took up that offer. And you can see that they go through the workshops and deliver that training, that business development training for them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And if we could just probably get updated on those programs as they go along, that would be great. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thanks, Mr. Undertaker. Thank you, Councillor Tan. Any other questions, councillors? Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The motion being that council receive and note the Chief Executive Officer's report for the period 17th of August 2021 to 8th of September 2021.
Thank you. A seconder. Councillor Tan. Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.2.1, the Mansfield Planning Scheme Amendment, C47, Planning Policy Framework Translation. Responsible officer is the Manager Planning and Environment, Melissa Crane. Councillors, are there any comments or questions on the report? No comments or questions. Councillors, do we have a motion, please? Councillor Rabi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the council endorse the proposed reformatting of the Mansfield Planning Scheme as proposed by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and to consent under section 20 brackets 5 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to the Minister for Planning preparing and approving Amendment C47 to the Mansfield Planning Scheme without exhibition under section 24 brackets 4 of the Act to approve the proposed reformatted planning scheme.
Thanks, Councillor Rabi. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sladden. Councillor Rabi, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Councillor Sladden.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Those councillors, those in favour? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.2.2, statutory planning services review update. Again, the responsible officer is the Manager of Planning and Environment, Melissa Crane. Councillors, are there any questions or comments on the report? No questions or comments. Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Rabi.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the motion that council receive and note the statutory planning services review update and associated update recommendation actions.
Thank you. A seconder? Councillor Tan. Councillor Rabi, do you wish to speak to the report?
No, thanks. It's fairly vanilla. Thanks, Mr.
Yep.
Mayor.
Councillor Tan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just to say that this review of the planning services is well underway, it's progressing well. And looking at the chart on page 20 of the agenda, the activity, the planning reports determined is coming down. The graph's going in the right direction. It's looking good, and the average days is also heading in the right direction. So well done to the people involved there.
Thanks, Councillor Tan.
Planning department and Melissa. Yeah.
Any other councillors like to speak at all to it? Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. The Lake Eildon GMW maintenance licence agreement, item 13.2.3, the Manager of Operations and Capital Work is Christian Burchett. Welcome, Christian. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Webb?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions just about the agreement. In the MOU, there's a lot of sort of good faith, and I'm really happy that this is sort of the arrangement we can come to. Is there anything in place just to ensure that everyone's holding their end of the bargain, maintaining the resources up to a standard level sort of thing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I can answer that question. Yeah, you're right, Councillor Webb. It is a good faith agreement that I think the first page really set out the terms of the agreement as such. I don't believe there are any provisions where we can take any action against another party or vice versa. If one doesn't hold their end of the agreement, it would follow the normal conflict resolution process in that case. So no, that's not something that we dealt with in great detail in that agreement.
Okay, no worries. And if there's new infrastructure added in the intervening time, whose responsibility is it to update, I guess, the register which both parties are working off? Is that council's responsibility?
If the added resource is within our area, that's our leased area, then we would update the plan accordingly because we would have the particulars on what that asset contains. If the asset was outside of that area, then it would be upon GMW.
Okay, excellent. And one final question, just now that this is in place, I guess what's the overarching strategy, or what's the plan going forward in order to draw on this Better Boating Fund, which the state government's put out, so that we can start benefiting from it as soon as possible?
Yeah, the first step in that, we took the first step, I guess, last week. Kirsten and I met with Better Boating Victoria. We met with a couple of representatives from Goulburn Murray Water, and we discussed an application that had come in for a boat ramp at Halcon and assessed that on its merits. And there seemed to be a lot of positive reinforcement behind that idea. And the next step is to come up with a more detailed plan on how that ramp would work, and then make the submission to Better Boating Victoria. So that'll be the first really positive outcome from this agreement.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Councillors, any other questions? Do we have a motion? Councillor Sladden?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion is the council acknowledge the final draft maintenance licence agreement with Goulburn Murray Water, which is attached, and authorises the CEO to execute the agreement.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Webb? Councillor Sladden, you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the work of previous and current staff in getting this agreement finalised. It's certainly something that is well overdue, and I would also like to acknowledge the work that Goulburn Murray Water has done in facilitating this agreement, and it can only benefit both parties and the Mansfield Shire and wider recreational boating and fishing people across the state. So very pleased to see it finally get done. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Councillor Webb?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, echoing Councillor Sladden's points there. Also, I think this is going to be a very important step as part of the broader Lake Eildon master plan as well. Getting this agreement in place, just everyone knows where they stand, and it just reduces the barrier to entry on a lot of these projects. So although it seems like a minor agreement in the scheme of things, it's actually a big stepping stone. So it's great to get this locked away.
Thank you. Councillors, any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Sladden, do you wish to say anything more on it?
No, thank you.
Okay. Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.2.4, Bonnie Recreation Reserve. Responsible. Thank you, Christian, firstly. The responsible officer for item 13.2.4 is Melissa Crane, Manager of Planning and Environment. Councillors, are there any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just like a bit of background over how much of the community was consulted during the process, and if there was any expressions of interest or anything sought from the community to take over the management of the site before council intervene.
For you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to take that one. Because this was initiated by the Committee of Management actually approaching council, and they did have their AGM approaching. There was limited time for us to do any board engagement, but as you would have heard earlier in the answers to the community questions that we received, we will absolutely be giving the opportunity for people to give us some feedback and potentially join a community reference group to be involved. And we very much welcome continuing community involvement in terms of the management of that reserve and giving feedback to council on that.
Okay, great. And in the event a local community group would want to take it back over from council, if they can show that they're organised enough to do so, will that be an issue, or will it be a process to do that? What's the process around that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it would be a very similar process to what we've taken in this instance, where it would require a report to council for council to make a decision over that and, decide on the merits of what's put in front of them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Sladen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know who to direct this to, but in the report, in the executive summary, it refers to a further commitment of $290,000 towards the reserve as a long-term capital works financial commitment. And I'm just wondering, does that include the construction of a new netball court at the reserve?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll pass over to the General Manager, Infrastructure and Planning to answer that question. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would anticipate the cost of the netball court would be on top of that, 290. And the reason I say that is that there was we had flagged the opportunity to potentially get some grant funding for the netball court. So I would envisage that would be additional to the 290. I guess just bearing in mind that 290 is an estimate, and we'll obviously firm up on those estimated costs as we consider each annual plan and put it before council as part of the budget process.
I do, through you, Mr. Mayor, I do believe it is important that councillors are aware of this, because that netball court does need replacing. It has already had some black marks against it by the Ovens and King League. So it's a project that is imminent, that needs to be needs rectifying. So we just need to be aware of the costs associated with that. And yes, hopefully Sport and Rec Vic can assist us with some funding on that. The second question, follow-up question, again, I suppose I'll give it to Ms. Alexander, and that is, in terms of setting a precedent, what happens in terms of, we have committees of management on Delwood land located at Tolmy, Jamison, Merton, other places around the Shire. In terms of an equity point of view, if council was to put ratepayer money into managing this facility. Yeah, so sorry, it's a double-edged question. Precedent in terms of those other communities and equity in terms of those other communities. Has that been considered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure I can actually answer that one. I think that's probably something that council will have to weigh up as a policy type decision in making this decision. In terms of, I mean, each decision needs to be taken on its merits, and I guess in this instance we have a committee that's approached us and has flagged quite clearly that they're not able to continue, that they've had trouble attracting members. So that is the circumstance for this one. As I understand it, we haven't been approached by any of those other committees, and I guess council would just have to consider any future approach on its merits. And certainly from an equity point of view, you know, just to be considering any applications that are made, you know, on an objective basis.
Madam CEO, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. There's no doubt about it that council invests more in its own infrastructure, the areas that it controls, and that's always been the case. So in taking over the Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve, I can imagine that council, you know, in terms of what's been flagged about the maintenance requirement, that would be built into council's budget. Council doesn't tend to invest in infrastructure it doesn't control, and that's where there is an equity issue, and that has always been the case. And I think that was part of what commenced the conversation with the Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve and prompted some of the request to council. But I would also say, councillors, you know, there is a recommendation before you, but obviously there are, you know, other considerations that you might be well aware of that we are not as officers to consider the item. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam CEO. Actually, there is a precedent set already, isn't there, with respect to the footy ground in town?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, council's always had control over that football ground. So traditionally it hasn't had control over the Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve to date. So when committees of management were set up, they were set up originally in different ways, and often communities really appreciate being in the committee of management and having control over their own infrastructure. Jamison's a good example and does very well with its responsibilities at Jamison. In other communities, sometimes volunteer committees go through phases where it's difficult to get support and committee members. Sometimes it just feels overwhelming in terms of the size of the facility. And Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve is a significant facility if you look at other facilities across the Shire.
Thanks, Madam CEO. Any other questions, councillors? Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Sladden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an alternative motion to the recommendation that is in the agenda, and I will read it as follows. 1, the council formally request from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning that Mansfield Shire Council is appointed as the public land manager pursuant to Section 14 of the Crown Land Reserves Act 1978 over the existing reservation known as the Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve. And 2, pardon me, once it is formally advised that it is the Committee of Management for the Bonnie Doon Recreation Reserve establishes a community reference group to develop a terms of reference for the group to assist council in the ongoing management of the reserve.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Tan. Councillor Sladen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. as is detailed in the officer's report, this has been an issue that's been ongoing for many, many years. And again, as the CEO mentioned, this is a very significant piece of recreation land that is very well utilised by a number of user groups. And I think in terms of, well, I believe in terms of the future use and development of this reserve, that this is a positive step. And with the assistance of a local community reference group, I think the reserve in total will certainly get greater use and will be of greater benefit to the entire Bonnie Doon and Mansfield Shire communities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen. Councillor Tan?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think, as Councillor Sladen highlighted, this has been an ongoing issue for a long, long time, and it's good to see that finally it's been resolved. I think I'd just like to acknowledge the committee, the current committee of management that are there, and the significant work and job that they've done and also working with their main tenant, which is the Bonnie Doon Football Netball Club as well. So look forward to a bright future there. I think it's also important to note that the community hall was built for the community, by the community in 1978. And it's very important to note that that is still the community hall and will be treated as such. But also that now council have got control over have got control of the committee of management, that we can aptly fund projects that need to be done there. And as we can see from this report, there are a lot of projects that have needed to be done that haven't been able to be achieved under DELWP. So look forward to working down there at Bonnie Doon and making this facility a first-class facility.
Thanks, Councillor Tan. Would any other councillors like to speak? Councillor Raby?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to also say that our bus trip at the start of the year brought this on. As far as I was concerned, the Committee of Management were fairly strong in their view and how they wanted to progress this. And for those listening out there tonight, we listened to you at that bus trip, and this is the outcome. So well done. I'd like to, emulate Councillor Sladen and Councillor Teane's comments as well. It's a great outcome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Raby. Councillor Webb?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I had, when I first saw this come up in the agenda, I did have a fear that this would take it too far removed from the community. I do feel that now putting in a advisory group will stem that problem. So I'm pleased for this to go through as Councillor Sladen has moved the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. Councillor Sladen, do you wish to wrap up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to acknowledge not only the current committee of management, but the previous committees of management over many, many years. There's been many, many volunteer hours put in to the running of this committee. And so, yes, thank you for reminding me, Councillor Tan, that we do acknowledge both the existing and previous committees of management. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that's all.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen. Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.2.5 is 53 Highton Lane, Mansfield, an application for a multi-lot subdivision and removal of native vegetation. The speaker, the responsible officer is Tim Berger, Coordinator of Statutory Planning. And I believe we have a guest deputation here, Mr. Ed Adamson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Can I see you? Yeah, sorry, Mr. Adamson, I can see you. Yes, I can now. You can hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Adamson. And over to you. You have just our governance rules. You have 3 minutes to speak, Mr. Adamson, and a bell will toll at 2 minutes. So over to you.
I was told 3.
Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
you have 3, but a bell will toll.
Council's-
Will toll at 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're right.
Council's response to the application for 53 Hyden Lane, Mansfield, it lacks logic. Here are my responses. Point 1, avoiding the removal, destruction or lopping of native vegetation is the highest priority under section 52.17 of the planning scheme. The significance and importance of the native trees on this site is crucial to the town's biodiversity, which is waning fast due to as of right removal of young and vigorous, old and healthy and ancient habitat trees. Destruction of this patch of vegetation is not in the public interest, degrades the amenity of this part of Mansfield and fails to address climate change. Other sites exist to increase the number of dwellings in Mansfield that don't involve killing all the trees. In any case, no lot on this site, if it is developed, should be less than 4,000 square metres. Point 2, of course, it's possible to minimise the impact of the trees here, by refusing the subdivision proposal. It is a proposal for development, not a right to create a virtual desert. 4,000 square metre lots would still meet the criteria of general residential zone and allow trees to be preserved. Point 3, offsetting by paying money for maintenance of another area of vegetation does not replace the loss of these trees, provide wildlife habitat in the town, and cannot replace the role this patch of vegetation has as a reservoir for nesting and feeding habitat for birds and animals to transition through. Point 4 argues to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is not necessary or good to let this proposal stand. Councillors, please refuse this application. Point 5 is invalid. Vegetation removal can be avoided or minimised by different land use intensity. As my objection says, the arborist report is wrong and must be held as invalid. There are perhaps 100 native trees on this site, over 15 to 20 years old, plus several trees 80 to 120 years old. That's not what the consultant report says. DWELP must not have relied on this arborist report. It is invalid and it's wrong. Point 6 is untrue. In my objection, I raised the fundamental concerns about this subdivision application, lot size, environmental impact, connectivity with other parts of the town. Point 7, where's the balance here between nature and development? That the consultant firm and arborist provided incorrect information on which the council relies today mandates council to refuse this application. Relevance to the council planning, the council plan 13.2.5, strategic objective 2.6, it talks about provision of sustainable community infrastructure and services. This proposal causes a significant
Through you, Mr.
loss.
Mayor. The 3 minutes is up.
Mr. Adamson, your 3 minutes is up. Could you please wrap it up?
Yes.
Thank
This proposal causes a significant loss of sustainable community infrastructure, a significant community recreation resource, treed at no cost to council. Compared this with the cost of establishing the Botanic Park. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Adamson. Councillors, are there any questions for Mr. Adamson? Councillor Raby?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Adamson, for coming tonight. Can you tell me what date that you made your complaint to council, please?
It was, I think, 2 days before the notice on the fence said it was closed, or maybe it was even on the day.
Okay, so it was before the objections public notice closing time, is that correct?
It was, yes.
Okay. And thank you.
Councillors, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Adamson, for your presentation, and thanks for coming along tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any other questions on the report? Councillor Ravi?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, to Melissa Crane. Melissa, what is the zoning of that land there, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the zoning in on this property is general residential 1 zone.
So am I correct in understanding that's blocks under 4,000 square metres?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. There is no specific minimum lot size in the zone, but there are provisions that allow for lots to go below 300 square metres in this area.
Okay. Mr. Adamson mentioned the report by an arborist, and there's an offset. I believe the arborist has declared 3 of the larger trees, which seem to be about 40 years old, to be that they must be removed. I think the arborist report says due to danger. So what is the offset in monetary value to Delwip for the removal of those trees?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, the any application that is required must provide a quote to demonstrate that they can obtain an offset. In this instance, the quote estimates the cost for offsetting the 3 large trees and the scattered patches of trees that are on the property that don't qualify for the large tree section is in the order of approximately $32,000.
And I've got one more question, Melissa, if you wouldn't mind. The 3 objections, did they fall within or outside of the public notice closing date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they all came in through the notice period. However, I will just, as a matter of order, qualify that under the Planning and Environment Act, council is obliged to accept objections right up until the point it makes a decision, regardless of the closing of the notification date. Thank you.
Thanks. And one more question. Does the developer of this proposed subdivision is there any other problem with this development? Have they gone through all due process? Does it meet the planning rules and guidelines of the Mansfield overlay, et cetera,
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, it certainly does. It's been assessed against all the relevant provisions of the residential res code provisions in clause 56, which are quite extensive, and it's been deemed to comply with all of them. It also provides for connectivity to blocks further to the west of this site as well. So it's been thought of more strategically in the broader area as well.
Thanks very much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Rabi? You don't have to read it out either, Councillor Rabi.
Yeah, it's. Thank you very much for that. I would like to propose the motion that exists before us in our Mansfield Shire Council meeting minutes, starting at page 35 and ending at page, help me out, Melissa, I think it's 46.
46.
Yeah. A lot of conditions on the developer, but essentially, what is it, 12 pages or something?
Thank you, Councillor Rabi. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Tan? Councillor Rabi, would you like to speak to the motion?
would, Mr. Mayor. I see this development as being a stage of a broader development, which is the intent of which is to deliver affordable housing for younger people. I'd like to make note that this has been going on for some time, and during that time, the blocks will most likely increase in value by 50%, which could be up around the higher 200,000 to 90,000 range, which may hinder some young people from entering the market. But I see it as a positive move. It's in an area that has already been developed. It's very close to the high school, and it has my endorsement.
Thanks, Councillor Ravi. Councillor Tan, do you wish to say anything?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, I think that this development, 18 lot subdivision, is in an area which is very already well developed and fits in the guidelines of the Mansfield planning scheme. The developer has done everything right in that respect. So, yeah, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Tan. Any councillors wish to speak to? Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion or against the motion? Councillors, those in favour. Councillor Ravi, do you wish to wrap up?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, those in favour of the motion? Thanks, councillors. The motion is passed. Item 13.2.6 is, sorry, councillors, I just want to take notes of this. Item 13.2.6, the purchase of the Crown Allotment 2009 Brown Street, known as the Police Paddock in Jamison. The responsible officer is the property management officer, Mr. Des Dunn. Welcome, Des. Councillors, are there any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Sladen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Dunn, excuse my ignorance here. In the recommendation, there's additional $1,000. Is that's not the GST? What's the additional $1,000 for the purchase?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer that. Des, I think
Thank you.
yours is on mute. The additional money is in relation to some fees and charges that are above and beyond the GST. So there's a Crown Grant creation fee, a lodgement fee and a valuation fee that was agreed to be paid by council as part of this process.
Oh, okay, okay.
Thank you.
And the Historical Society and the community group couldn't get together and have a barbecue and raise $1,000? That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer that, Ms. Crane. Sorry.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Tan?
Yeah, just one, Mr. Dunn. Just the bore that's situated on the block, which supplies the public toilets, who's going to be responsible for the upkeep of that?
Well, sorry, Councillor Tan. Could you repeat that, please?
The bore that's on the...
the bore. Yeah, sorry, the standpipe. It was the council supplied the money originally to build it. Are you talking if the council were to purchase a property, who'd be responsible? It would be the council, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah. Because it supplies the water to the standpipe for the
exactly.
CSA, I imagine. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Any other questions, councillors? Do we have a motion? Do we have a motion, councillors? Councillor Raby?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The council, one, approved the acquisition of the land known as the Crown Allotment 2009 parish of Jamison, Brown Street, Jamison, from the Department of Treasury at the cost in the 2014 Valuer General's valuation of $25,000 Australian plus GST, and two, approve the additional expenditure of $1,066.05 to support the purchase of this land.
Thanks, Councillor Raby. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sladden? Councillor Raby, do you wish to speak to this?
I would, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I see this as an outstanding opportunity for the council to assist the Jamison community in purchasing this. It's been going on for some time now. I don't know where in our shire you can purchase a block at this discount. It's it's an outstanding opportunity. And I'm sure that everyone in Jamison will be very happy that it's now being retained in perpetuity, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Raby. Councillor Sladden?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, as the report does highlight, this is something that has been going on since 2014. The hold-up was the native veg issue, and why it's taken 7 years to solve that issue is beyond me, but I'm glad it has been solved. And I'm also very pleased to see the wording that it is in perpetuity for community, well, restricted community use. It is very well utilised by the CFA and the local Jamison community, and yep, it's another great asset for the community of Jamison and the Shire at large. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Councillors, anyone else like to speak for or against a motion? Councillor Raby, would you like to wrap up?
No, thank you.
Councillors, those in favour of the motion? Motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.2.7 is the Mansfield Men's Shed lease dispute. I think, Councillor Sladden, you've declared a conflict of interest. So you'll be in the waiting room, is that correct?
Yeah, I think Moira, Ms. Moss is going to kick me out. Is that right? Or do I leave and no?
As you wish, through Mr. Mayor, I will remove you to
Yeah,
the waiting room.
Thank you. We have a number of guests here at the moment, so welcome Kylie Richards from the CEO of Mace. Welcome Janine Ridley, the chairman of Mace, or chairwoman of Mace, and welcome Murray Chenery, a board member of Mace. And we also have three members of the Men's Shed in the waiting room, Mr. Ray Barker, Mr. Dane Bender, and Mr. Bill Copley. Just a few governance rules going into this. Every speaker is allowed 3 minutes, and we'll be fairly stringent on that. At the 2-minute mark, a bell will ring. Questions, where appropriate, will be asked by councillors of the speaker. The speakers are not allowed to ask questions of either the executive or councils or the councillors. So with those rules in place, the first speaker, I think, is Kylie Richards. So welcome Kylie, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to outline the key points of history in order to correct a number of inaccuracies in Mr. Dunn's report. In 2002, Mace stated its goal was to assist and encourage, and if necessary, auspice the development of new and existing groups. During 2002, Mace agreed to support the concept of a community men's shed in Mansfield, as put forward by then Mace board member Don Hodges. An MOU was drawn up in February 2003 between MACE and the Mansfield Community Shed Steering Committee. This committee consists of 2 MACE board members and 2 other members and no longer exists. It was established to manage the project to build the community sheds only. MACE was unsuccessful many times in securing funding for a men's shed. However, in 2004, MACE secured federal and state funding for the construction and establishment of 2 community education buildings, now known as the Mansfield Community Sheds. MACE contributed over $14,000 to this project. MACE paid for the majority of operational outgoings for maintenance and overheads until 2018, when the men's shed offered to contribute towards the electricity costs. MACE has always maintained that the MOU was in relation to supporting the Mansfield men's shed financially by providing neighbourhood house funding until the men's shed could be established and became a standalone incorporated entity, which it did in 2013. MACE has always maintained that the MOU was not in relation to the lease of the land or ownership of the community sheds. They are 2 separate issues. In 2014, the annual report from MACE states that the goal was for MACE to auspice the sheds for a 12-month period only until the men's shed became incorporated. The report also states that MACE maintains its support of the shed through the provision of the facility and with administration support. We believe this confirms that the auspice arrangement has been fulfilled and that the men's shed does not have any claim towards the lease of the land or the ownership of the building. In 2018, following a successful application to fund a kitchen refurbishment at the community sheds, the men's shed requested a formal document to prove that they had security of tenure in order to receive that grant. MACE offered a neighbourhood house agreement, an MOU, at the time that was rejected by the men's shed. To resolve this issue, MACE, the men's shed and council met in February 2019 and reached an agreement between all parties that MACE would draft a licence agreement between MACE and the men's shed. All parties also agreed that the lease had been secured for 30 years. That was until 2033. In summary, MACE secured the funding to construct a community shed. This was not funding for a men's shed. In 2014, the annual report confirms that MACE's goal was to auspice a steering shed committee for a 12-month only period. MACE has paid for the majority of outgoing expenses in relation to maintenance and the overheads. The men's shed are one of many community groups that utilise MACE's community shed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Richards. Councillors, are there any questions of the presentation? Councillor Raby?
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Hi there, Kylie. Kylie, have you read the Mansfield Shire Council September Council meeting agenda?
I have.
Okay, so you're aware of the decision that we have to make tonight then?
Correct.
Okay,
Hence
thank you.
my deputation.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Any other questions, councillors? Mr. Richards, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That was concise and right on point. Thank you. The next speaker, I think, is Janine Ridley, the chairwoman of MACE. The president of MACE. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will outline the current situation and implications, including corrections to Mr. Dunn's report. The Mansfield Men's Shed signed a copy of the licence agreement in November 2020. Unfortunately, their solicitor sent an incorrect version of the final agreement. When the correct version was resent to MACE 3 months later in February 21, the Men's Shed reneged on their decision and chose not to sign the agreement. It must be pointed out that the Men's Shed continues to enjoy ongoing tenure, as was previously the case. The community sheds are also used to support neighbourhood house funded groups and learn local programs. MACE is a not-for-profit organisation. We work on behalf of the community. Owing to some compliance issues a number of years ago as a previous registered training organisation, we had 5 years of significant deficits. After a major business review in 2017, we have recorded 3 years in a row of small surpluses. MACE has based its short and medium-term future business goals on Council's publicly stated position in August 2020 in relation to the community sheds, which was The lease for the land remains valid and continues to exist with Mace. The community sheds currently sit on Mace's balance sheet at $23,500. The depreciation cost to Mace over the past 16 years has been $76,000. We expect the sheds to be fully depreciated by 2026. If Mace is forced to hand over the sheds, the $23,500 sitting on the balance sheet will have to be expensed as part of our profit and loss and will tip Mace into a deficit position. Mace currently has a significant loan that we are servicing and cannot afford to go into deficit again. As you indicated at our recent catch-up, Council does not want to see Mace go into deficit either. The 2003 Memorandum of Understanding was between the Community Shed Steering Committee and Mace. The Steering Committee no longer exists, and the Mansfield Men's Shed wasn't registered until 2005, 2 years later. If Council deems the MOU to be between the Men's Shed and Mace, and on that basis the community sheds are handed over to the Men's Shed, Mace will expect that item 5 in the MOU is enforced. That is, Mace will be recompensed for all outgoings by the Shed Committee. Mace has paid out approximately $30,000 over the years in both capital and operational funding, which would need to be repaid by the Men's Shed. Mace will also expect to be recompensed for the current balance sheet cost of the sheds by either Council or the Men's Shed. In summary, the Men's Shed has signed a licence agreement, albeit the wrong one. The Men's Shed has ongoing tenure. Mace's future business goals are based on Council confirming Mace's lease was valid. Mace would incur a deficit if the sheds are handed over, and Mace would seek recompense of over $50,000 if the sheds are handed over to the Mansfield Men's Shed. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions? Mr. Ridley, I have a question with respect to the lease. There's a number of things that I don't understand with this whole process, but one of them is the lease. How I read the lease, you're out of terms with the lease because it wasn't renewed back in 2000. The option wasn't taken up in 2013. Why wasn't that taken up?
Well, I can't answer that question, Mr. Mayor, because I wasn't on the board at the time, but our inquiries have discovered that everyone was under the impression that the lease had been secured for 30 years, so to 2033, because a $30 payment was made by Mr. Don Hodges back in 2003.
But it's very clear when you read the lease that what the further terms are and how those further terms are enacted, and it's nothing to do with the $30. This is one of the things that I don't understand about this, and I don't understand why that wasn't. Anyone that can read the lease could see that there's been a breach there. And that's why I don't understand why it wasn't.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if we had have been in a position to have done something about it at the time, we would have done it. We would have done things differently. You've got a different board, you've got a different CEO. So all I can say is that until the Men's Shed approached us to organise to get some sort of document to prove that they had security of tenure, we were unaware. We were under the impression that the lease had been secured until 2033. And we had not had any other information from Council to the contrary. And at the February meeting in 2019 with Council and the Men's Shed, all three parties agreed that the lease was secured until 2033.
I just find it odd that no one had read the lease in 8 years.
It had never been an issue until the Men's Shed asked for a document to get their $25,000 grant for the kitchen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Thanks, Mr. Ridley. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Murray Chenery, welcome, Murray. And Murray's a board member of Mace. So over to you, Murray.
Thanks, Mark. Look, I'd like to outline a way forward in this matter. We've clearly shown that the community shed is an asset of Mace. Mace respects Council's decision to convert our long-term lease over the community shed into overholding. We would also like to think that Council takes a balanced view of this situation. At a recent meeting with the Mayor and the actual Council CEO, Mace was assured that the report from Mr. Dunn would be objective. However, we are very concerned that this report is not objective. We've obtained an email from the Mansfield Council to Mr. Dunn dated the 27th of July this year, where Mr. Dunn is instructed to, and I quote, recommend that Council provide Mace with notice of council's intention not to renew the lease or terminate. This email further states that, and I quote, a report be presented along these lines to the September council meeting and should be scheduled on the agenda planner. Now, a copy of this council email has been sent to councillors last night, and I hope that you have read it. We are extremely disappointed that the report's outcomes were already predetermined. This biased instruction by council shakes the foundation of council and calls into question its core values of integrity and respect. Council's core value of integrity states that you aim to achieve the highest standard of good governance, transparency and accountability, and that you will keep an open mind on all issues. Council's core value of respect states that you believe it is important to create a respectful and fair environment to support good decision making, and that you believe it is important for increased understanding and trust, and emphasise trust, and that between council and the community. Councillors, at the start of every council meeting, you confirm your commitment to ensuring your behaviour meets the standards set by your code of conduct and charter, and you will at all times faithfully represent and uphold the trust placed in you by the community. Your code of conduct states that you will at all times act with integrity and openness in the best interests of the community. As councillors, you should and must question the efficacy of this report. Now, in the spirit of Mace being open, transparent and cooperative, here is a way forward for all parties. The first step is council confirms Mace has a valid lease over the community shed until the actual year of 2033. The second step is that the Men's Shed organisation fulfills its original commitment of signing the licensing agreement, the right version. And the third step is for Mace and council to set a date to discuss the community shed lease beyond the year 2033. We thank council for allowing us to speak to this very important community matter. We would hope that council recognises that a solvent Mace is fundamentally important, and that to Mansfield's success as a diverse and inclusive community. Councillors, we have a very strong view that the community
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the time is
should not
up.
be available for just one community group. We believe it is the right of every community group to call the community shed their home. We trust that council will seriously consider the facts put forward and apply your core values in taking a balanced view of this situation, which is in the best interest of the entire community, that the community sheds remain a Mace asset. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions to that? Councillor Ravi?
Yeah, thanks, Murray, for coming. And I've noted that you have said that Mace is an open, transparent group. So my question to you is, how did you receive an email that is confidential to the council?
It was given to us.
By whom?
I would rather not say that, Stephen.
But you're saying you're
given to us as part of the investigation.
Yep. Steve, Councillor Ravi, we will take that up. Don't worry.
Yep, fair enough.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Tan?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Murray, for reminding us about our affirmation of office. If I could just remind you that we do renew that oath at the start of each meeting, so you have no problems in knowing that we will make a unbiased and open decision. Thank you,
James.
Any other questions, councillors? Murray, I just have one question. How much of the Mace revenue, what percentage and how many dollars does the Men's Shed represent?
I'd have to ask Kylie to answer that question. She's the CEO and she would have the finances, Mark. So if Kylie could come back into the Zoom meeting, she might be able to answer that question.
Kylie?
Sorry, Mark, can you clarify that?
Sorry?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
I'm just interested to know what percentage of Mace's revenue is represented by the men's shed?
0. It's just a cost, the community shed. So we don't actually receive any funding from the men's shed at the moment.
So there's no income generation. There's no income from the men's shed to Mace.
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Murray, for that. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Ray Barker. Welcome, Ray, from the men's shed, and thank you for coming along.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oh, hold on.
That's a great sound machine.
Yeah, sound effects. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors and staff of the council for listening to us. My presentation is more just on where the shed sits at the moment. From one man's vision, which was Don, we've grown here for the last 18 years. We've provided a lot of activity for the men of Mansfield. Plus, we've hosted the quilting groups who are part of our family, if you like. They use our facilities, we use, and they are part of our group. We've striven to improve the sheds over the years. We've put in the air conditioning, we've built our office and kitchen, concreted the breezeway between the two sheds, put a roof on it, installed the container for our wood, and most of this material we actually scrounge from the tip. A lot of it is secondhand material. We have always facilitated a space for the quilting groups, and we'll continue to do so. We consider them part of us, and the crafting groups. The men's shed has grown and matured, and we've always done a lot of handyman services for the community of Mansfield. And personally, over the past several years, I've developed lasting friendships here and achieved an enormous sense of satisfaction with the projects that we achieve. And I believe that Mansfield will be a poorer place if the shed was forced to close. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Rabi.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I read a week ago or 2 weeks ago in the local paper from an ex-Mace board member that apparently there have been many donations to the men's shed by community members. Have you got a list and a value of that on hand?
We can provide it. You've got to turn that off. Yeah, we can provide. Our treasurer is not here, but he could provide it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
But this all goes. A lot of the initial funding donations were given to Mace in their role as our auspicer. Since then, we've had donations from various community groups. The the bush market have donated a fridge to us. There's been several others, and Canavans have supported the shed over the years. Plus, we do ongoing work for the Delatite Hotel. But yes, we can provide that information from our treasurer.
Thanks, Mr. Barker. Actually, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
We'll know.
Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And thanks for your presentation, Ray. Greatly appreciate it. Just a quick question. It may be one that you have to supply to us later. I'm not sure of the full financial arrangements between Mace and the men's shed. I guess in terms of the organisation of Men's Shed Mansfield going forward, do you feel confident you can stand on your own 2 feet as a sort of independent organisation if Mace wasn't, I guess, providing the lease?
Yes, Mace, to be honest, at the moment, Mace don't provide any funding to us at all. They generate funding out of the shed through the quilting groups, but we don't have a financial arrangement with Mace. And the only one we did have was in the past, it was agreed that Mace could run its welding courses here, and in return, they would cover the electricity bill for the shed rather than actually have a payment to use the facilities. And that's been the arrangement for quite a few years. And again, the welding courses are always welcome here and always have been.
Thanks, Mr. Barker.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other questions, councillors, I'll move on to Mr. Bill Copley from the Men's Shed. Welcome, Bill.
We've got one more, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Dane.
Yeah, correct. I apologise, but I didn't see Mr. Bender on screen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Dane Bender. I'm 37. I've been a member of the Men's Shed for approximately 2 years. I'm battling drug addiction and anxiety, and the Men's Shed has been critical for my recovery. And I've found the Men's Shed and the people to be very welcome and very, very, very helpful in showing me how to use all the equipment, and yeah, and there's always someone to talk to, and yeah, it gives me a lot of I need to keep motivated and keep active, and the Men's Shed is very important for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bender. Those comments are much appreciated. Thank you. And thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
Mr. Copley, sorry, you're the final speaker for the Men's Shed. Thank you.
Unmute. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Dane. It's a great insight into the reason for the shed being even here. I'm going to do something slightly different. 131278. What's that? Anyone? Someone whispered to me one day, "Hey, that guy is about to go off a cliff." 131278 is a crisis assessment team number. It's a psychiatric flying squad for mental health episodes. We got Wangaratta CAT team on site, and they arranged a proper psychiatric care for that member's wife. His untreated 20-plus year mental health problem had been pushing him to the limit. That's another untold story of the mental health in our community, how the Men's Shed fits in. Ray is right about the shed. It's the men that make the shed, and we disagree completely. Mace does not own this building as an asset. The original management of Mace signed an MOU intended to be respected by honourable parties. Mr. Sladden witnessed that MOU a month before signing the lease, with Mace becoming a bare trustee for the land. It can only be said that Mace acted as an honourable auspicer at that time, so the clear intent of that MOU must be honoured now. Mace's position has cost our community $18,000 plus in one lapse grant and the eligibility for many more. The shed cannot and will not operate under Mace. Their comments about in the press about risks to community groups are completely unfounded. And Mace, because that we don't communicate directly with them, only through lawyers mostly, Mace might be surprised that today our membership is actually 60, up from 41. And that includes 16 ladies quilters, crafters, or women persons with additional needs. Our lawyers advised us it's difficult to see how Mace writing off an asset with no resulting cash flow implication would jeopardise the solvency of Mace, particularly when that asset was never beneficially owned by Mace in the first place. And as a matter of fact, we've been subsidising the welding classes for the last 3 years. So the shed continues to seek grants and raise its own funds. And for example, we spent $4,000 on tools last year. We've also become a registered charity with DGR status through the ATO, and that's a huge advancement in the scope of our shed and the future community work. Like our Community Connection program, where we'll provide specially set up tablet computers to our members in Bindari or hospital or at home. When we hold the lease, the land lease, we'll kickstart our investments with new plans for the kitchen, solar, LEDs, dust extraction. We plan a ladies' toilet and a new doorway for the ladies into the kitchen for them. We're also researching a virtual power plant where battery accumulated through our solar power would be made available to the community. People like Mansfield Radio would be beneficiaries, as well as possibly shopkeepers in Errol Street. And we will always tinker with broken chairs and kids' toys and Christmas trees, but none of this is possible until Mace relinquishes. A land lease to Mace is not relevant to the men's shed. Mr. Mayor and councillors, many folks have asked the shed, why is Mace doing this at the expense of the men's shed? Continually denying the clear intent of the MOU. The shed is in full support of your recommendations in the agenda, and we urge that the land lease to Mace be terminated and end this debacle.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the time is finished.
Thank you. Mr. Copley, you ready to wrap up, or you close to wrapping up?
Yep, that's the wrap.
Okay.
We support the recommendations and we urge that the land lease be terminated. The information provided by Mace is often been not what we've felt the whole story. And we don't, we weren't coming here to a kangaroo court to go and chase every single point that was raised by Mace, but their position is clearly wrong.
Okay, Mr. Copley, we very clearly get where you're coming from. We understand. So
thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions, Mr. Copley? Councillor Tan?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Copley, thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering, you mentioned that that the men's shed missed out on an 18,000 or was one less grant short of $18,000. Would you care to reiterate a bit on that or expand on that? Sorry.
Yeah. In one of the projects that we planned to improve the sustainability of the shed was a kitchen refurbishment, solar power and LED lighting project. We applied for that grant through the Department of Health and were successful. Mace provided a letter of support at that stage, and that was prior to my knowledge of the position and the history of the shed. It was a $30,000 project, of which the men were putting in 11,000 and the health department was putting in 18,703. The Mace's position with the security of tenure and the drive down to get this sub-license agreement caused a 2-year period to expire, and that $18,703 grant was lapsed by the health department.
Thank you. Is there any other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Ms. Copley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chenery. And thank you, all the other speakers as well. Sorry, Councillor Ravi.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I thought, is there any other questions for Bill? I've got a specific question for Murray, Kylie and Madam Chair of the Mace board collectively. And that is, do you understand what is before us tonight in the Mansfield Shire Council meeting minutes? What sits before us? Do you three understand that?
Yes, we do.
Thanks, Murray.
Okay, thank you. If that's the Councillors, are there any other questions or comments that you'd like to make on the report that's before us? No, nothing at all. Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Rabi?
Yeah, I'd like to move the motion, Mr Mayor. The council, 1, receive and note the status of the lease as legally being in overholding. 2, agrees with the Men's Shed Incorporated's interpretation of the original intent of the auspice agreement between Mace and Men's Shed Incorporated, signed on 2003, that being upon the incorporation of the Men's Shed or Community Shed as an entity, the lease would be handed over to the Men's Shed Incorporated, including the assets, and that further lease agreements would be between council and the Men's Shed Incorporated. 3, writes to Mace and Men's Shed Incorporated, advising council's position on the intent of the original auspice agreement, and urges Mace to honour the intent of the agreement, which was to support the Men's Shed Incorporated in the construction, upgrades and maintenance of the building, and then to hand over the project to the Men's Shed Incorporated. 4, receives a further report on this matter at its October 2021 council meeting. And 5, takes no further action on the Mace council lease until council receives the further report, and leave the existing lease in an overholding arrangement until such time.
Thank you, Councillor Rabi. Do we have the seconder? Councillor Tan. Councillor Rabi, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I would, Mr Mayor. I find this fairly distasteful, basically, as a community member, but as a councillor having to make judge an agreement between Mace and the Men's Shed Incorporated, should have been able to work this out yourselves. Really, look, I think that there is a way through this that everyone can benefit. We are talking about the community. We as councillors represent that community. There's been a lot of community effort in this. I've been in Mansfield since 1983, so I've got a fairly good idea of what happened back then with Bill, who was the leading instigator of the Men's Shed. Unfortunately, they weren't incorporated back then. I stress to all parties that we can work together to get an outcome here. And I'm hoping that it'll be a beneficial outcome to the whole community. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rabi. Councillor Tan, do you wish to speak as a seconder?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. And thanks for all the speakers tonight. It's given a good perspective of both sides of the argument. Firstly, I'd just also like to thank Mr Dunn for his report. I think it's a good report. I think it's very balanced, and I think it covers both sides of the argument very well. So thank you for that. I think that the two organisations should put their heads together again and come up with a solution instead of council having to do this. But if they don't, then in 2 months' time, it will come back to council. So I encourage both sides to really get together and to try and find a workable solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. In general, I think I mirror both Councillor Tan and Councillor Rabi's comments. It's got completely out of hand, this situation, in my view, and the fact that it's come to council in this manner is disappointing. We have two community groups in front of us that play an enormous role in our community, both as important as each other. And what I see is that both parties can't see the bigger picture and work for the overall benefit of the community. There's a lot of mud in the water and a lot of historical issues and a lot of communication issues, which is all in the past. And as Councillor Tian said, you've got the opportunity now to put your heads together and come up with a solution that benefits the community and not either one of your organisations, because ultimately you both exist for the community as a whole and not a small subsect of it, the entire community. I really want both organisations here to take a breath, take a step back, look at the larger picture and just try and come up with a solution that benefits all parties, including the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. Councillor Rabi, as the mover of the motion, you have the final say.
Yeah, just one more thing to add, and it mirrors Councillor Tian's comments about Mr. Dunn. I know Des Dunn, and I know he is a man of impeccable integrity, and I trust his report. And thank you, Mr. Dunn, for sending a balanced report to Council tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rabi. Councillors, those in favour of the motion? Thank you. The motion is passed. I'd just like to wrap up by saying thank you to the speakers all for coming in. I'd also like to acknowledge Des Dunn's work on this as well, because I'm reasonably well across both sides of the argument here, and I thought it was a really balanced view, Mr. Dunn. So I thought you covered it well. And I totally refute the accusations made against the integrity of this council, which I'm part, and I take it really seriously. And the code of conduct, any breaches in that, I totally refute that as well. I think we do have an issue, perhaps, with leaking of documents, and we will follow that up as an organisation at whatever lengths necessary to get a result on that, because that's unacceptable. Thank you. Let's move on to item 13.3 is the Mansfield Community Vision 2040. Sorry, Councillor Rabi.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. There's still got Murray Chenery in our council meeting.
Sorry, I did test. Sorry, Murray, we're going to have to kick you out.
No worries. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, thank you. And we welcome back Councillor Sladden. Thank you. Mansfield 13.3.1, Mansfield Community Vision 2040. Responsible officer is the General Manager of Community and Corporate Services, Mr. Kurt Heidecker. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillors, if there's no question or comments, do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Motion being that Council endorses the draft Mansfield Shire Community Vision 2040 and releases it for community consultation until the 8th of October 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. A seconder? Councillor Rabi. Do you wish to speak at all, Councillor Webb, to that?
I will briefly, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This community vision document is very much that, driven by the community, and it's done with a significant amount of community engagement. So for all those who have been involved in this process so far, thanks very much. It's really, really important that the community owns the future, and I think this is a document, although it is legislated in the LGA, I think it does play an important role in shaping the destiny of the community. So very interested to see the broader community's feedback on where the process is at so far.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. Councillor Rabi, did you wish to make any comments?
Yeah, just briefly, Mr. Mayor, endorsing Councillor Webb's comments, that it's now over to the community, and we look forward to having a broader community make comment of this. It's your vision.
Thanks, Councillor Rabi. Would any other councillor like to speak for the motion? Or against? Thank you. Councillor Webb, do you have anything else to sum up with?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.3.2, carry forward projects. The responsible officer is Manager of Business Performance, Ms. Mandy Kinnersley, but Mr. Kurt Heidecker is here on behalf of Ms. Kinnersley. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Tan?
Just one question, Mr. Heidecker, and you might have to take this on notice, but the percentage of unspent funds carried forward is 33%. How does that compare to previous years? And I don't expect you to answer that now, but that would be a question on notice, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sladen, I didn't see it.
Yes, I'd just like clarification on the unspent Working for Victoria funding. That's just a bit unclear to me. Is that money that we have received and yet to expend, or is that carryover positions due to the extension of the Working for Victoria program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't comment categorically. I've got an understanding, but I'm not confident in it. But the CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, the Working for Victoria funding extended over the end of financial year, so we still had staff under that program. So we had received the money, but we needed to carry it forward because the program didn't finish at the end of the financial year. Did I get that question not quite right?
No, I think you got the question right, Karen. I just couldn't quite follow the logic of the answer.
Yeah.
I think the logic was good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
My intellect wasn't up with it.
Right. Okay. Councillor Sladen, could you just repeat your question so I can get it right? Thank you.
Okay. The question is, with the unspent funds, the carryover funds for the Working for Victoria, is that carried over because Working for Victoria program is continuing and it's funds that have been unspent? Or is it, well, yeah, why is there the underspend there, I suppose? Yes, that's the question.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it was because it continued beyond the end of the financial year and the funds weren't spent.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, councillors? Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Sladen?
Yes, the motion is the council approve carry forward funds from the 2021 budget to the 21-22 budget for the completion of the projects listed in this report, totaling $959,360 in operating net of income and $2,670,193 in capital net of income.
Thank you. Seconder for the motion? Councillor Webb? Those in, sorry, Councillor Sladen, do you wish to speak to the motion at all?
It abides by the by council's carry forward policy, so I have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Those speaking for the motion? Against the motion? Okay. Let's put it to the vote. Those in favour of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Item 13.3.3, performance statements. The same responsible officer, Mandy Kinnersley. Council, any comments on this? Fairly straightforward. Do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Motion being that Council adopt in principle the performance statements of Mansfield Shire Council for the year ended 30th of June 2021, and 2, authorise Mayor Mark Holcomb and Deputy Mayor Councillor James Tehan to certify the performance statements of Mansfield Shire Council for the year ended 30th of June 2021 as adopted in principle by Council, subject to any changes required by the Victorian Auditor General's Office.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. Seconder for the motion? Councillor Raby. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, fairly straightforward. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raby. Those in favour of the motion? Thank you. The motion is passed. Annual financial report, 13.3.4. Again, the responsible officer, Amanda Kinnersley. Councillors, any questions? Do we have a motion? Councillor Sladden.
I'll just turn the mute off. The Council, 1, adopt in principle the financial report of Mansfield Shire Council for the year ended 30th of June 2021, and 2, authorise Mayor Mark Holcomb and Deputy Mayor Councillor James Tehan to certify the Mansfield Shire Council financial report for the year ended 30th of June 2021 as adopted in principle by Council, subject to any changes required by the Victorian Auditor General's Office.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Webb. Councillor Sladden, you wish to speak at all to the motion?
I would like to congratulate the management and staff in the compilation of this annual report. It's a very comprehensive annual report, so my thanks to them. And I'd also like to take this opportunity, Mr. Mayor, to acknowledge the work of Ms. Mandy Kinnersley for the past 5 years that I have worked with her, and I've always found her to be great support and a fantastic team player. So thank you, Ms. Kinnersley. I, for one, will miss you.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak?
Just seconding Councillor Sladden's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do you wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Tehan.
I'd just like to make a comment that's been highlighted in this report about the reserves and how they're not typically carried a negative value as they traditionally utilised to park cash for the future. Audit have therefore recommended the reserves be removed. Management have not made this adjustment as is considered critical to provide public record of the level of cost recovery of waste management. And I think that's a really good thing because going back in the past, we've had a lot of issues with waste management. It's encouraging to see that we are now collecting what we spend in that area. So, yeah, just a note on that report.
Thanks, Councillor Tehan. Anyone else want to speak to the motion? Are those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 13.3.5, the review of the Mansfield Shire Council Instrument of Delegation, Schedule 6, Council to Council Staff. Responsible officer is Moira Moss. It's a long time. You've had a long wait for this report, Moira. So, councillors, any questions? No questions. Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The motion being as written on tonight's agenda, page 75 under item 13.3.5.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Raby. Do you wish to speak to that, Mr. Webb? Councillor
No,
Webb?
thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raby. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Okay, those in favour of the motion? Thank you. The motion is passed. Item 13.3.6, Governance and Management Checklist 2020-2021, responsible for Maura Moss. Councillors, any questions there? Do we have a motion? Councillor Tan? A seconder? Councillor Rabi?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the council receive and note the Governance and Management Checklist 2021 and to authorise the Mayor and CEO to sign the Governance and Management Checklist 2021 for the purposes of the 2020-2021 annual report.
Yes, so, thanks, Councillor Tan. Sorry, Councillor Rabi, for calling you in early. So, second to Councillor Rabi. Councillor Tan, you wish to speak to the report?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rabi?
No, thank you.
Councillors, anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Those in favour? Motion is passed. Item 13.3.7, the Mansfield swimming pool costs for the 2020-2021 season. Responsible officer is Saskia Van Beaver. Saskia is here. Okay. Good evening, Saskia. Sorry for keeping you waiting.
That's okay.
And welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, is there any questions with regards to this report? Councillor Ravi?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Hi there, Saskia. Sorry about you having to wait to the end. Saskia, I like the report. I'll just absolutely clarify that there are no solar panels on the roof of the Mansfield pool. Is that correct? But thank you. And
that is correct.
Water from the toddlers' pools runs through some sort of black piping arrangement. Does that seem to work okay, does it? I've never swum in the toddlers' pool.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is actually a type of heating that is used very commonly in private pools as well. So it is black piping that runs across the roof, which is then heated by the sun, and it does heat both toddler and learners' pools.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's the matting. I drove past today. I couldn't see it. So understood. Thank you.
Councillor Tan?
Hi, Saskia. Just a question regarding following up from the previous meeting where we discussed the swimming pool. In that, I think the question was asked, there was an attendance decrease of 28%, but the income for the pool remained the same. I think the question was asked as to why that was, and that was going to be explored. Do you have any enlightenment on that anymore?
I'm afraid I don't.
Can we get we did ask that question, that's correct. Can we get some confirmation on that, about what you think's behind that? It was a big drop in attendance. And yet the costs were the same. The costs were the same, or was it vice versa? Yeah, the costs were the same.
Yeah, similar income at a 28% decrease, and it was perhaps something to do with the type of use of patronage. But anyway, yeah, if you could get that to us, that would be fantastic.
For you, Mr. Mayor, I actually would have to say that I don't think we can find that information unless Saskia has another idea. The staff have gone through all the records and all possible record keeping to date and can't get that detail. So I wouldn't like councillors to expect it, because at this stage we don't have it. So am I correct there, Saskia?
Yes, you are correct. So we can make assumptions regarding less memberships, but then an increase in session passes, then session passes. There's an increase in maintenance due to COVID, but we can't find the exact information.
Councillor Rabi?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So Saskia, it's a good segue into the future. Do you intend to be having more of a focus on this in future and putting in place a spreadsheet for the councillors to look at the end of the swim season?
Yes, so we have gone through a tender process. So we're looking at new ways of managing the pool at the moment, and this will be presented to you, I believe, in the next couple of weeks. It is noted that a change is required, and we are all committed to ensuring that information is obtained and shared with you as needed.
Thank you, Saskia. I'm sure it's in good hands. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Slade?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Saskia, can you tell me when the solar blanket was purchased by council?
Ooh, I will have to check that with the Capital Works team.
Okay, can you also tell me in relation to Councillor Rabi's earlier question, the budgeted figure for the solar panels to heat the pool, can you tell me why that hasn't been done?
Again, this would be a question for the Capital Works team, and I will ask them and get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, any other questions? Okay, councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Rabi?
Here we go. The motion is that council note the report.
Thank you. A seconder for the motion, Councillor Webb. All those in favour of the motion? Thank you. Councillors, item 13.3.8, the Audit and Risk Committee member appointment. Responsible officer, Mr. Kurt Heidecker. Councillors, any comments on this report and this appointment? Oh, sorry, Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Only comment being that Mr. Peter Johnson's currently on the Audit and Risk Committee, and I've found his contributions to be excellent, very knowledgeable in finance and business and risk, and the recommendation on the table today, I think, is a very good idea.
Thanks, Councillor Webb. Any other comments? Okay. Do we have a motion? For Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Motion being that Council number 1 appoint Mr. Peter Johnson as an independent member on the Audit and Risk Committee for a term of 3 years commencing 13th of November 2021, and 2, write to all applicants to inform them of Council's decision and thank them for their application.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Rabi? Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak any more to that?
No more comments than I've already mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rabi. Those in favour of the motion? Thank you. I'd just like to endorse Councillor Webb's comments. Peter Johnson's an excellent, outstanding member of that committee, and he's got experience as a CEO of other shires, so he brings that those talents to the table as well. Whereas the other people are more straight out accountants. So it's a really good mix of skills around that audit and risk committee table. We're very lucky. Item 13.4.1, the indoor aquatic facility at request. The responsible officer is our CEO, Caitlin Conrick. Are there any questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Sladen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Conrick, in reading the report, I see only one reference to the existing outdoor pool facility. And I note that there is no sort of review in the recommendation that is before us. There is no review or any mention of the future use of the indoor pool, of the outdoor pool. And I'm just wondering, should that not be considered as part of this item on the agenda?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess there's two ways council can approach this. One is to look at the feasibility of an indoor facility, and should that advance to a particular stage, then what's the implications of the outdoor pool? So there's quite a bit of feasibility work to get through first to determine whether that is feasible, and should it get to that stage, I would expect council would need to consider the implications. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I've just realised there is speakers to this item.
Yes, I've overlooked that. I just noticed that as well.
Sorry, I'll come back to that if I can.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, my apologies. Sorry, Moira, I didn't pick that up that they were on the screen. Can we welcome Emily Dirksen, I think first, is that correct?
Yep. Can you see me or hear me?
Emily, we can just, yeah, I can see you now. So welcome.
Sorry, I'm in my car. I was down in Vanilla, so I didn't get home in time.
Right. Are you driving? Are you driving as well?
Well, trying to, yes. No, just kidding. No, I'm not. Yeah, so I'm one of the local GPs at Central General Practice. So thanks for allowing me to speak about the benefits that an indoor aquatic center would provide our community as far from a medical perspective. I found it interesting when I asked for input from my GP colleagues yesterday after finding out I was going to speak, that I heard back from almost all of them. Whereas usually it takes countless emails and bribes to get people to respond to things. It just demonstrated how important they feel an indoor pool would be to our community, and the benefits would be just massive. Obviously, swimming confers benefits for health, physical and mental health and well-being, quality of life, and as well as a sense of community. In 2017, England conducted a study on the health and well-being benefits of swimming, and I don't think there's one in Australia, but I have no doubt the findings would be similar. And it showed that the economic burden of physical inactivity in terms of healthcare costs, productivity losses, and disability adjusted life years was over $51 billion per year. So it's tremendous. Most of the population failed to meet national recommendations for physical activity. 90% of 2 to 4-year-olds failed to meet that, 80% of 5 to 15-year-olds, and 40% of adults. It's estimated that people who swim, whether it's for recreation or for competition, their ability to meet physical activity guidelines are tremendously higher. So it's key to addressing, as I said, physical and mental health issues. The physical health, I think, benefits are pretty obvious. So cardiovascular, respiratory, musculoskeletal rehabilitation. So it improves heart health, it reduces blood pressure, improves lung capacity, it reduces joint pain, increases bone strength. The research has identified that any amount of swimming participation compared to none is associated with a 28% and 41% in all-cause and cardiovascular disease causing mortality. Most common GP presentations that we see are musculoskeletal complaints, such as osteoarthritis and back complaints, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, asthma, emphysema, falls, postoperative rehab, dementia, obesity, mental health. They all would benefit by a prescription for exercise, particularly swimming. Aqua-based exercise offers specific advantages compared to land-based exercise, in that it reduces weight-bearing stress on joints. It has higher humidity levels, it's decreased heat load. So we have quite extreme temperatures in Mansfield, particularly in summer and in winter. And so swimming can oftentimes, people can't go running in 46-degree heat, but you go swimming. So it has lots of benefits over land-based exercise. And we recently at our practice have started a chronic disease management program, which focuses on preventive health. And the positive response from our patients has been overwhelming. We've just been so surprised that we didn't appreciate the need that there was for this preventative medicine and how much benefit it would provide for our patients. And one of the most common conditions that we address is osteoarthritis, which the management involves exercise and physiotherapy, weight reduction, and simple analgesia. And swimming, in particular hydrotherapy, would be the most beneficial treatment for this condition. However, unfortunately, now Mansfield has no pools except for in the summer months. There's just 3 months of the year, because the only indoor pool just closed, and it was just a small pool, but it was quite important to the community for offering learn to swim classes as well as hydrotherapy. That would close in May. So we have no pools now available. So all these patients that need hydrotherapy have to go to Benalla or Wangaratta. Many of them, that's not feasible. They either can't transport and drive themselves there, or they can't afford the petrol. Some are getting vouchers from council to do so, which is great, but obviously that could be much better served by an indoor aquatic center in Mansfield. The benefit, and then I have chronic pain patients who, may have chronic pain from post-stroke, from chronic regional pain syndrome, from various other conditions that report in the summer months when they are able to swim, their analgesia requirement is significantly reduced, and many eliminated by being able to swim. And so during the winter months, they have to then go back to opiates, things, the morphine, endone or which has so many side effects that impact their quality of life. And it all can be prevented by being able to swim. And then as far as the mental health—
Mr. Mayor, the time is up.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Emily, if you could wrap it up, please.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, as far as the mental health benefits there, I could speak for hours, so obviously I won't. Exercise can cause the same structural changes to the brain as antidepressants, and so the tremendous impact that would have on our community, and just the sense of community would be tremendous. Having schools and competitions in our community, having the ability to host these competitions. Right now we have a swim team that has to train if they want to in the winter outside in Wangaratta or Benalla. And so a lot of them turn to other sports because it's just not feasible. So it would be.
Thank you, Emily. You put the case very eloquently. So thank you for that.
Okay. Thanks.
And drive safely.
I'll try.
Are there any questions of Ms. Dirksen before?
Should we turn this off?
Okay.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Cassie, welcome. Welcome tonight. And thank you for hanging around. You're right at the end of the agenda. So it's been a long wait for you.
Okay, thank you.
Can please go ahead. There's a time limit of 3 minutes, and you'll get a bell at 2 minutes. Please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been invited to share my personal experience of when I ran an all-year-round swim school from my home here in Mansfield, as well as providing some other important facts, of course, in support of an indoor aquatic centre. George's Fish Swim School ran all year round for almost 9 years, focusing on swimming lessons for children under 14. During this time, I'd teach consistently between 200 and 250 students per week. and ran intensive programs during all school holidays. And the last 2 years, aqua aerobics was added to the schedule. As an example, say term 1, 2020, so pre-pandemic, there were 239 students and 21 aqua aerobics attendees enrolled. And upon closing down at the end of term 2 of this year, there were 202 students and 35 aqua attendees. The reduction was only due to COVID-19 mitigation procedures that were in place. So therefore, wait lists were always there. So for the swim school, generally between 30 and 50, but since term 4 last year, so pre-summer, between 50 and topping at 150 waitlisted. This summer, I was turning away people almost every day with regard to learn to swim and those needing hydrotherapy, as mentioned by Emily. I think that was probably one of the biggest call outside of learn to swim was hydrotherapy for those with chronic conditions, because I couldn't quite come to aqua aerobics, but needed that sort of private physiotherapist led therapy. And for me, really, it was time. The pool was a capacity I was instructing from 9 morning till 8 o'clock at night. So it was really just needing that bigger space and that more time. So also private sessions, obviously, session for those with disabilities and people wanting to swim laps. Inquiries were from locals, but also many from moving to the area. So in saying that, my total swim school numbers comprised 250, comprised of infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and school-aged children. So in comparison, Mansfield currently has approximately 834 primary-aged children and 159 kinder students. That's excluding figures from one kinder. So knowing these figures, I was only able to service a fraction of the children needing access to swimming lessons all year round. And furthermore, I also want to share with you that according to an Australian study done in 2017, 50% of primary school leavers were not reaching set benchmarks in stroke development, and 68% were unable to tread water for 2 minutes. It was confirmed to me today by the same body that the figures are still relevant due to the pandemic. And there's also a few other statistics showing current trends under the circumstances that I'd like to share with you tonight. Royal Life Saving Australia's drowning report from 1 July 2020 to 30 June 2021, so including our summer just gone, 294 deaths, 674 near drownings, which is increased by 20% on the previous year. The most of any age group, rivers remain the leading location for drowning. And tragically, deaths among children aged 0 to 4 years has increased by 9% compared with the 10-year average. But most concerning is 108% compared with last year. That's how much it's increased. I've also been advised by Autism Swim Queensland that children and adolescents with ASD
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, the time is up.
Are 3 times more likely to drown than those without. All factual and morally important reasons for our Shire to provide our community with an all-year-round facility. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Cassie. Thank you. And thanks for being very concise in what you put forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question I've got. I mean, those numbers are quite astounding. I swim a lot at the local pool, and those numbers have really blew me away. So why, and particularly when the town pool is open, why are those people going to your pool versus town pool versus the main pool, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because it's indoor and heated, so the water temperature is controlled, the air temperature is controlled. And so then classes remain consistent week to week, so we don't have any interference with inclement weather. Children under the 3 years of age, according to the Guide for Safe Pool Operation, must swim lessons in 32-degree water or more, so 6 months old to 3-year-olds. So that so I was able to provide that for them. And parents really value swimming lessons in our region. Call after call, we have dams on our property, we have river frontage. You know, we water ski a lot over the summer, and I really want them to know how to, you know, behave in open water. And what else can I think of? As Emily mentioned, mental health. I see mental health improve in children and physical health in children. And I have worked with children with disabilities, and the movement and the benefits they get out of aquatics is just heartwarming. So there are quite a few things.
No, thank you. No, you've answered. Thank you. Councillor Riley.
Hi, Cassie, and thanks very much for coming along tonight. I'm astounded at that you've got 200 to 250 children learning to swim at your facility, which is now obviously closing or closed. Out of those, just generally, don't give me the specific facts, but how many people in Mansfield that have a pool in their backyard still send their children to learn to swim with you?
Oh, I've, to be honest, never had anyone say, well, actually, how do I phrase this? People call me and say, we want to get a backyard, we want to get a pool. So I want my children to be water familiar and water safety familiar. You know, within our classes, we talk about, you know, not breaching the fences and waiting for mum to always watch you. So I'd say more than not, I would have parents concerned and absolutely having them swimming in lessons before they get a backyard swimming pool. And then, of course, there is benefits to having a backyard swimming pool, because they'll keep swimming, they'll keep having lessons, so they'll keep having that recreation confidence time and that stroke development and survival skill time in lessons. So they definitely complement each other. I wouldn't have people withdrawing, especially in the 6-month to 8-year-old mark, because they have a pool, so they'll be fine.
Councillor, are there any other questions? Thank you, Cassie.
Okay, thank you.
You've done a good job, so you've answered the questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, are there any other questions on that at all? Okay, do we have a motion? Councillor Rabi?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the motion that 1, provide an in-principle support for land A8658 at 34 Bellevue Court to be designated as land for an indoor aquatic facility for a period of up to 5 years. 2, collaborates with year-round aquatic facility for Mansfield, which is YAFM, to undertake an assessment of community need to determine demand and identify facility components as the first step in planning for an indoor aquatic centre facility. 3, develops a collaboration agreement with YAFM outlining each party's commitment, roles and responsibilities. 4, notes that collaboration with YAFM means an in-kind council contribution only at this stage, understanding that council has not provided a budget amount for an indoor aquatic facility project. And 5, receives a report on each stage in the planning process.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have a seconder? Councillor Webb? Councillor Rabi, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I would, Mark. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make sure that the community understands in this report that's before us that one of the key issues down on the bottom of page 93, says agreeing to the Yaffin request is likely to create an expectation that planning will progress and that council will be actively involved. It may also stimulate increased community interest and involvement and provide momentum to a long-planned initiative. This recommendation that I'm putting before council tonight is only that we identify the land for Yaffin to be able to have assurance to go out and create a report. That report will be then submitted back to council so that we can look at it, and it may be used for Yaffin to go out and seek funding for a benefit to the wider community. This has been going on for a long, long time, and I think it's a great outcome for the community to get together and drive this yourselves. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak as a seconder?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to state that I'm a very strong proponent of community-led initiatives, and Yaffin to me really shows how it's done. They're a very well-run incorporated body, very strong at fundraising, and have very clear direction in what they need to achieve. I think it's very, very easy for council to support an organisation such as this, who have everything together and can present it to us as a neat little package. So I congratulate Yaffin for getting to the stage. I also congratulate Councillor Arabi for being a very vocal proponent of Yaffin within council, and I'm really excited to see the next steps in this project.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Tan?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. In speaking to this motion, I'd just like to make it clear, and it's probably been made clear by Councillor Arabi, that this is only an in-kind contribution that council is making at this point. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we get to the stage where any council funds would be directed at this. It's to give them the assurance that there is land there available if there was a project that was able to be financial, or to be a project at all for a start, but then to be financially viable for the ratepayers in this town. And that will be something that will be scrutinised, particularly from my behalf by council, I hope. So anyway, well done, and well done for Yaffin, who have got a lot of community money there to hopefully bring forward a good project.
Thanks, Councillor Tan. Councillor Arabi, do you wish to wrap it up?
Yeah, I understand time's critical tonight. Been going on for a while, but I'd just in closing like to say I did some research and spoke to Hannah Calvary, Manager of Research and Evaluation at Lifesaving Victoria, and something that we all will be very surprised about, that this local government area has the highest drownings in all inland rural councils, 8 in the last 10 years. So to support swimming is something that I'm keen to do, and teaching children, babies how to swim is with us for our lives and could save someone's life. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Arabi. Councillors, those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. Thank you. Councillors, we're in the home straight. 13.4.2. I notice a couple of you nodding off, but no names. 13.4.2. Council Policy, Equal Opportunity and Human Rights, Responsible Officer Julie Dolling. Any comments, councillors? Do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. A motion being that Council endorse the updated Equal Opportunity Human Rights Policy, July 2021, version 5.
Thank you. A seconder? Councillor Sladen. Those in favour? Motion is passed. Thank you. Assemblies of councillors, item 14. Councillors, any questions? Do we have a recommendation? Sorry. Do we have a motion? Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Motion being that Council receive and note the Assemblies of Councillors report for the period 11th of August 2021 to 15th September 2021.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Turn. Those in favour? The motion is passed. Thank you. The council resolutions register. Councillor, do we have a motion? Councillor Sladen.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The council receive and note the council resolutions register as at the 17th of August 2021.
Thank you. A seconder? Councillor Webb. Those in favour? The motion is passed. Thank you. Item 16, advisory and special committee reports. Do we have a motion, councillors? Councillor Raby.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The council received the minutes of the advisory committee meeting as follows. Mansfield Ordnance Risk Committee held on the 23rd of August 2021.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Turn. Those in favour of the motion? The motion is passed. And we race to point 18 and the meeting declared closed. Thank you, everyone. That was a big agenda to get through. So well done. Very well done. Particularly with a number of delegations or deputations. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Good night.
And thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kirsten.
Hang on. One thing. Sorry. Ms. Moss, are we off streaming just before we continue?
We're live.
You're on mute, Ms. Moss, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to close the meeting? Declare the meeting closed.
I thought I had. Sorry, my apologies. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now